So last week we spoke about Biwot's daughter. She's called Rita Biwot Marsham, who perhaps, staged a story in one of the gutter press that she had forfeited her inheritance, citing the fact that it's questionable acquisition. The dad was involved in all manner of things, including murder, including corruption, dispossessing people of their land and property, and also grabbing public assets, public parastatals, and converting them to his own. In fact, today, all the problems that bedevil the country as regards to energy, communications can be traced back to Nicholas Biwott. So, Nicholas Biwott, they were hiding behind the World Bank and the IMF when they wanted to engineer heists, when they wanted to convert public assets into personal property. So one of his daughters who doesn't get mentioned and whose role in the collapse of the Kenyan economy cannot be understated is one person called Esther Koimet. If you look at Wikipedia, she was born in 1957. She is amongst the age group of boomers who we say are retrogressive, are toxic. They have bequeathed us nothing but problems. Boomers, she falls in that category, but I want you to go to look there below where I've spoken that she was instrumental in the drafting of the privatization bill, which was enacted into law in 2005. So Esther Koimet has been relevant in the Moi regime, has been relevant in the Kibaki regime, has been relevant in the Uhuru regime. And all because of what? All because she knows which parastatals to sell, which ones were sold. In 1992, when she was just joining the civil service and everything, and through the issuance of the policy paper on the public enterprise reform and privatization, you see, they're very good in cooking words and terminologies when they want to execute a heist. The government outlined the scope of the public sector reform program, the institutional framework, and the guidelines and procedures for privatizing public enterprises. The policy papers identified 240 commercial public enterprises and with public sector equity participation and classified them into two categories. By the end of the first phase of the privatization program in 2002, most of the non-strategic commercial enterprises had either been fully or partially privatized. So you see, they were using Esther Koimet to because now she was there. Obviously, she's Biwot's daughter. First of all, she's now the administrator of his estate. Now, we are not going to focus on anything because Biwot has his hands everywhere. He has his hands in all these, we are calling them independent power producers. He owns many of them, which are still supplying power to date. All those contracts were signed when Esther Koimet was the investment secretary. But let's start with our telecommunication woes. You saw the other day, based on this article by Daily Nation, that the ghosts of Mobitelea have returned to haunt billions out of Telkom Kenya. So a transaction that was done in 1998 is still coming to haunt us in 2023. This is the stupidity of the boomers. And that's why I tell you, these guys need government more than government needs them. They cannot survive without government. They are dying outside government because they are so intellectually malnourished. They have intellectual anemia. They cannot, even with the money that they have stashed in foreign bank accounts, in all those tax havens where they've stolen our money and stashed it, they cannot even come up with brilliant ideas. All they just know is primitive accumulation. This toxic era of the Moi regime has now reared its ugly head. And I told you, the William Ruto regime, the Kenya Kusha shit show, there is no difference between that and Moi. In fact, they've reverted back to the same rule book, the same playbook, where now they want to grab the parastatals. Now Parliament has now been reduced to be a lame duck, where they just rubber stamp anything that comes from the executive because they've been bribed with 10,000 in the toilet. You understand? Which is why when we are talking about overhauling the governance structure you must make sure you don't re-elect anyone, first of all. And then when you're electing, you start vetting. You're not going to remove somebody. You start vetting your politicians now. And don't forget, as we agreed, no boomer is going to vote. You're going to do all it takes to make sure that your parents and grandparents and your aunties don't go and vote that day. I don't know what you'll do, but you have to negotiate with them and tell them in their interest. If they don't want us to take them to the Goto, home for the aged, they must stay at home and not vote in 2027. So Esther Koimet, this deal was done in 1998, has come to haunt us. And let me tell you, what happened? Our telecommunication had a monopoly company called Kenya Post and Telecommunications Corporation. So it was split. First of all, the Communication Commission of Kenya went its own way. Then there was Telcom Kenya, which was handling the landlines. Then there was Posta Corporation of Kenya, which was handling the mail. And then there was another department which was carved out, which was, nobody knew about mobile telephony in Kenya at the time. It was called Safaricom. So Safaricom were only giving services, the mobile telephony, to a niche clientele of probably less than 10,000 people who were going with the prefix 0071. So Safaricom, during that same period of 1998 to 2000, it was bought out, or it was acquired by Vodafone. Nobody knows the intricacies of these deals other than Esther Koimet. And that's where Mobitelea was birthed. What is Mobitelea? Back to this newspaper article in The Nation by John Kamau. John Kamau is a very sober writer. He's not very like all these other idiots who are still jacking themselves off with Uhuru on the headlines. So as we try to unpack, read this article, as we try to unpack the story of the 6 billion Telcom Kenya payment to a UK-based private equity fund, I think it would be essential to recall the other story of Mobitelea Ventures, a briefcase company that emerged out of the shadows of the Moi regime, and before we could understand what was happening, it had a 10% stake in Safaricom. So let me tell you something about Muzungus. Muzungus will always lecture us here about good governance, transparency, accountability, but when corruption benefits them, they turn a blind eye. Now, since Vodafone UK was a beneficiary of the Safaricom buyout, because now Safaricom has become a money spinner for them. They are even masquerading as the inventors of M-Pesa. And now they say now M-Pesa now is just playing games with your psychology. Yet their work has just been appropriating our intellectual property. So Safaricom, the parliament tried to investigate Vodafone. They tried to even call the CEO, everything, nothing. They've never gotten to the real owners of Mobitelea. It has been such a topic, a topic of and a cause of consternation to people, how a company can be given 10% for free. Up until 2006, Mobitelea and Vodafone and Safaricom never even filed taxes. That's the level of banditry that was in this country. And so when the Moi regime through Esther Koimet were selling our public assets, our parastatals, when they were doing it, they were doing it through private treaties. And like, Amos Kemunya, he's not like the biggest angel, but during his time, government entities were being sold through IPOs, you remember the first IPO with Kenyan, all these others that came, afterwards. Because with IPOs, there's some element of, transparency. We can see the value. But then these guys, through Kestrel Capital, they were hijacking and stealing national assets. So, Esther Koimet is can we call her? I don't know what we can call her, but you can see here is this. I've just extracted photos from Biwot's funeral. You can see the grandchildren there. You can see Biwot and the children there, because Biwot had many wives, but I think the Israeli is the one. You can see many of them there. But this is wealth that was illicitly acquired. And we can't be having these people still calling the shots, because you've seen this Kenya Kwisha shit show have reverted back to the same blueprint, because they are intellectually malnourished. They are intellectually deficient. They cannot think of new ways to stimulate the economy, to generate new wealth, which doesn't need to cannibalism of public coffers. They are reverting back to the Esther Koimet blueprint. They are no different from Moi, from Biwot. So Kenyans, it's up to you. Do you want to continue on this trajectory? If the answer is no, you have to make sure you wake up and vote. You have to make sure that your boomer parents don't vote, because the boomers were silent when this economic genocide was being inflicted by Moi and even Kenyatta era. They were silent. Now they want to grab even more assets, and the grabbing will mean that the services that you're now accessing for a certain amount of money will multiply tenfold. Kenya Power, when it was being sold, you know, it was still the same characters who are in the picture. And now you're seeing the bills are inflated. Every month they're being inflated by close to 40% by the corrupt Kenya Power, because of Nicholas Biwott and Esther Koimet, who are still calling shots.